Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are doing well on this fantastic Wednesday, May 1st. I am Donovan Campbell, General Manager, Licensed Funeral Director, and Embalmer at Campbell & Sons Funeral Home. And today I have here with me Mr. Paul Harris, President and CEO of Regulatory Support Services. This evening, we're going to have a brief discussion about the General Price List, also known as GPL. We're going to discuss the reasons why, as funeral directors, we provide the General Price List to families. We're going to also talk about anyone that comes in a funeral home inquiring about prices. We also have to provide this document, which is the GPL, General Price List, to them. So I want to introduce to you Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Donovan. Yes. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening and join you and your viewers. My name is Paul Harris. My wife has owned Regulatory Support Services, which is a company that was founded in 1994 to assist funeral homes with regulatory compliance, Federal Trade Commission for the Funeral Rule, state board regulations in various jurisdictions, and OSHA compliance.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. And so my question for you, Mr. Harris, I know with your Regulatory Support Services, the Federal Trade Commission, we have to be in compliance with them. Most families, when we start the arrangements conference and we issue the General Price List out, they're thinking the funeral directors, a funeral home is just about money. Why do we issue them out at the start of arrangements, the General Price List?
Well, it is a federal requirement primarily that consumers of funeral goods and services receive a general price list upon the initiation of the discussion of funeral services or disposition arrangements, or the prices of those, or the types of merchandise like caskets, burial vaults, or urns the funeral home might offer. That's the catalyst that requires the firm to then distribute a general price list, physically offer it to the consumer for them to retain if they wish.
Okay. And as far as with the purpose of this general price list, I know it's to provide the family's transparency.
Yes. Okay. And there are a number of items that have to be on the general price list. 16 pricing elements of services that are offered, merchandise that are offered by the firm. There are a number of required disclosures that have to appear on the general price list. And it's so the family can make an informed decision about what the cost of the arrangements will be as they're making the arrangements, instead of getting some type of surprise bill, or in the old days prior to the funeral rule, which is the FTC regulation is called, firms would hand the family a bill, and sometimes everything was rolled up in price. The family had no idea what individual prices were.
Okay. So in funeral service, we weren't always regulated by the Federal Trade Commission.
That's correct.
When did it come about?
The funeral rule became effective in April of 1984, and there's only been one change to it that occurred after its initial implementation. As you and I know, the funeral rules in the midst of being reviewed and will be substantially changed when the FTC rolls out its proposed rules to change it.
Okay. So out of the 16 items that are mandatory to be on the price list, I just want to touch on two. One is the first item, which is that always appear first on the general price list. If you can turn the second page, Bernice, up at the very top, professional services, and just below, you will see basic services of funeral director and staff. Mr. Paul, why is this the first item, and also too, this is a non-declinable item?
That's correct, Donovan. It appears as required by the funeral rule to have a basic service charge, and it's the only charge the Federal Trade Commission allows to be non-declinable, which means it's charged to every family that is served by a funeral home. And it sometimes can be discounted in the four minimal services, such as immediate burial, direct cremation, forwarding and receiving of remains. But everybody is supposed to pay that fee because it applies to any types of services for disposition that the funeral home offers.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And one more item, which is the embalming. Embalming is what, as you see stated, that is not required by law.
That's correct.
Yes, sir. And what's that reason? Why is it not required by law?
Well, it's up to the individual states. There are only 2 states that have requirements that appear to be a legal requirement for embalming under certain circumstances. That's why that paragraph disclosure underneath the embalming charge is required. It started off with except in certain special cases. But there's only 2 states that require that have a law that may require, as I said, embalming in certain special circumstances. Um, it was a disclosure the Federal Trade Commission felt was necessary because too many funeral homes at the time, their research showed, were implying to families that it was a legal requirement that they have embalming. And it's not the case then, it's not the case now. It is a family choice. Now, further to that, firms can require embalming, for example, if there's going to be a public viewing or visitation, an open casket, if you will, because there are changes that we know that occur naturally following a death and a remains or a body. And so they will, the embalming is supposed to help delay those and improve the appearance of the remains.
Yes. And I do, when I meet with families in the arrangements conference, I do just let them know that is not required by law in Georgia, but it is our policy. If you decide to have a public viewing, the casket being open, it is our policy to for your family member to be embalmed.
That's correct. And you're certainly allowed to do that by the Federal Trade Commission.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then with package pricing, is it such thing of, does the Federal Trade Commission require you to have a package price, or everything has to be itemized, which was told to us? I just want to make that clear.
That's correct. You can have package pricing or regional pricing, which are optional. You must have the itemized prices, even if you offer package pricing. And the thing to remember about packages, and one of the roles that we play for our clients is we check their math. So a package price can be equal to the sum total of its parts, but it cannot be more than the sum total of its parts. If I took all the items offered in a package and price them out individually based on the prices that appear in the itemized section of the general price list, they should be at or below for package pricing. A lot of firms use packages to offer discounts to families. You're entitled to offer a package for which you don't allow any kind of changes. You can say this is our package for a memorial service or a graveside service or a full Campbell and Sons funeral service, and it can be dollar for dollar, the same as the itemized pricing, or it can be a reduced price. You can also limit those discounted package pricing to families that purchase a casket from you or a vault from you as an incentive for them to purchase that. And the FTC has given its blessing to that as well.
Okay. Good deal. Good deal. Now, also too with the general price list, as I mentioned too, when I passed the general price list out, some families will jokingly say that it looks like a restaurant menu, but this document right here, to the viewers, families that we've served, this document is and the reason why the Federal Trade Commission came up with the funeral rule is to protect the consumer.
That's correct.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, it also allowed funeral homes to understand what their overhead costs were, which many didn't understand at the time, but pre-dating the funeral rule and the use of GPL or general price list. So it was always designed to help consumers understand the pricing and what they were paying for services, and allow them the opportunity to decline a service, for example.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Mr. Paul, I know you told me not to call you Paul Harris or to call you Mr. Harris, or I got to call you Mr. Paul. Our time is coming to an end. I do want to thank you for joining us tonight live, and I hope to speak with you soon in reference to me becoming a client of yours with regulatory support services. We're wanting to keep up with our documentation and want to comply with the Federal Trade Commission. Anything else you have left to say? Or
well, I think we talked about before we went live about how, and I was still practicing. I'm a licensed funeral director in Palmer, and when I was practicing, we would give out general price lists and start discussing the cost of the funeral. Families would sometimes bristle at that because they thought that we were just interested in the money. And it is a business, and the funeral home does need to worry about the money, but they have an obligation under federal law and in all states too to provide pricing information in accordance with the funeral rule. And so it's not just about worrying about being paid. It is providing the family or the consumer with clear and concise information about pricing, what the funeral home's charges are, what the cost of a casket or a burial vault or an urn will be, so they can make an informed decision. We know that grief is a very powerful emotion, and one of the tenets of grief recovery is you shouldn't make important financial decisions in the midst of grief. And a funeral is the top 3 most expensive things that a family will pay for in their life, behind buying a home, perhaps college education, or buying a vehicle.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have a question. I'm looking into pre-planning. Any suggestions on getting that started? Yes, Ms. Bryan. What you'll have to do is just contact us at the funeral home. The telephone number is 912-234-7226, or you can email us at Campbell & Sons Funeral Home @gmail.com, and then we'll get you started with pre-planning services. So before we wrap up, anyone have any questions? Any viewers out there, do you have any questions for myself or for Paul? It sounds weird.
I know I can tell that. You're very kind and respectful to address me as Mr. Harris, but as we cleared up earlier in our friendship, it's just Paul.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes,
One
sir.
thing I'll mention, Donovan, too, talking about the basic service charge, and I had this experience as a funeral director 30 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, a death occurred out of state. I'm in North Carolina. That's where I was practicing at the time. And the death occurred in Arizona. And the family ended up filing a complaint with our North Carolina Regulatory Board. And this is before I was part of the board,
Hmm.
still a practitioner, because her husband died in Arizona and she paid the Arizona Funeral Home a basic service charge.
Hmm.
And she did not understand that both firms have basic service charges. The money she paid the firm in Arizona had nothing to do with the expenses on our end in North Carolina.
Hmm.
And that was one of her complaints. So many consumers that are watching watching today, if there's a death that occurs out of state, you should be prepared that you're going to incur some basic service charges at the funeral home out of state, as well as the receiving funeral home where the burial or cremation will eventually happen back in your home state, so to speak.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes, sir. I've been challenged with that, with the basic services of funeral director and staff myself over the years as being licensed, and I had to continue. I had to ask the seasoned funeral directors in reference to the basic services of funeral director and staff. Um, but when you touched on it in when you were speaking at the Academy of Graduate Embalmers of Georgia, and you touched on it a little in reference to the basic services of funeral director and staff. And since then, I was able to explain to families better as far as the purpose, why this charge is charged to the family. And I always start off with the basic services of funeral director and staff. Let's see. I'm sorry, Mr. Paul. I was reading the question too.
That's quite all right.
Yeah. Is there any upfront money due at the time of pre-planning? No, there is not. There are many ways you can pre-plan and prepay for a service. You can, with life insurance, you can do a pre-need burial insurance, which is when you pre-plan, it's an insurance that is only funded at the time of passing, but it's a pre-need burial insurance. Am I explaining correct, Mr. Paul?
I would agree with you. I would also go further a little bit, Donovan, to say when we use the term pre-planning, when I use the term pre-planning,
Mm-hmm.
that is what I call an unfunded funeral plan, where a consumer sits down, first of all, with their family and discusses what they want done at the time of their death.
Uh-huh.
And that can be a difficult conversation to have, an uncomfortable conversation to have sometimes, but it's necessary. Um, so pre-planning can be as simple as sitting down with your family or taking the next step and involving your funeral home, Campbell and Sons Funeral Home, to memorialize your wishes and your record at Campbell and Sons. And then the next step would be either partially or fully prepaying for it.
Mm-hmm.
Funded with a number of trust or insurance products, as you mentioned. There are a lot of options out there. You don't have to prepay, although putting some money partially or fully funding in advance is usually designed to stave off the effects of inflation, because funeral homes are affected by inflation just like any other business. And the more you can try to lock prices in at what today's price and typically the growth stage with that product, so that it offsets price increases in the future, and the family generally doesn't have to pay anymore. I don't want to misstate Georgia pre-need law, Donovan, but That's generally how pre-need works across the United States.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? All right. Again, Mr. Paul, we thank you for joining us tonight. Everyone, we'll see you all next month. And we'll come up with the topic and we will post to our Facebook page. Mr. Paul, you have anything to say?
Just thank you so much, Donovan. Good to see you again, albeit virtually. Much better when we're face to face, but I appreciate the confidence and the invitation to join you and your viewers here tonight.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. See you all next time.